Democracy, the God that failed, the economics and politics of monarchy, democracy, and natural order, written by Hans-Hermann Hoppe and narrated by Paul Strickwerda. Chapter 10. On Conservatism and Libertarianism. 4. While the intellectual creators of modern libertarianism were cultural conservatives, and while the libertarian doctrine is fully compatible and congruent with the conservative worldview, and does not, as some conservative critics claim, entail an quote-unquote atomistic individualism and quote-unquote acquisitive egoism corrupted by modern welfare state, the libertarian movement has undergone a significant transformation. To a large extent, and completely so in the eyes of the media and the public, it has become a movement that combines radical anti-statism and market economics with cultural leftism, counter- and multiculturalism, and personal hedonism. That is, it is the exact opposite of the Buchanite program of culturally conservative socialism, countercultural capitalism. Earlier it was noted that the Buchanite program of socialist nationalism does not seem to have much mass appeal, at least not in the United States. This is true to an even larger extent for the libertarian attempt to synthesize market economics with counter- and multiculturalism. Yet, as was the case with conservatism before, in this case, too, my central concern is not about mass appeal and whether or not certain ideas can be psychologically combined and integrated, but whether or not these ideas can be combined practically and effectively. It is my plan to show that they cannot, and that much of contemporary libertarianism is false, counterproductive libertarianism, much like Buchanan's conservatism is false and counterproductive. That much of modern libertarianism is culturally leftist is not due to any such leanings among the major libertarian theoreticians. As noted, they were for the most part cultural conservatives. Rather, it was the result of a superficial understanding of the libertarian doctrine by many of its fans and followers, and this ignorance has its explanation in a historical coincidence and the mentioned tendency inherent in the social democratic welfare state of promoting a process of intellectual and emotional infantilization, decivilization of society. The beginnings of the modern libertarian movement in the United States go back to the mid-1960s. In 1971, the Libertarian Party was founded, and in 1972 the philosopher John Hospers was nominated as its first presidential candidate. It was the time of the Vietnam War, simultaneously promoted by the major advances in the growth of the welfare state from the early and mid-1960s onward in the United States and similarly in Western Europe, the so-called civil rights legislation and the war on poverty. A new mass phenomenon emerged. A new lumpenproletariat of intellectuals and intellectualized youths, the products of an ever-expanding system of socialist public education, alienated from mainstream bourgeois morals and culture, while living far more comfortably than the lumpenproletariat of old, off the wealth created by this mainstream culture, arose. Multiculturalism and cultural relativism, live and let live, and egalitarian anti-authoritarianism, respect no authority, were elevated from temporary and transitory phases in mental development, adolescence, to permanent attitudes among grown-up intellectuals and their students. The principal opposition of the libertarians to the Vietnam War coincided with the somewhat diffuse opposition to the war by the New Left. In addition, the anarchistic upshot of the libertarian doctrine appealed to the countercultural left. For did not the illegitimacy of the state and the non-aggression axiom that one shall not initiate or threaten to initiate physical force against others and their property imply that everyone was at liberty to choose his very own non-aggressive lifestyle? Did this not imply that vulgarity, obscenity, profanity, drug use, promiscuity, pornography, prostitution, homosexuality, polygamy, pedophilia, or any other conceivable perversity or abnormality, insofar as they were victimless crimes, were no offences at all, but perfectly normal and legitimate activities and lifestyles? Not surprisingly, then, from the outset the libertarian movement attracted an unusually high number of abnormal and perverse followers. Subsequently, the countercultural ambience and multicultural relativistic tolerance of the libertarian movement attracted even greater numbers of misfits, personal or professional failures, or plain losers. Murray Rothbard, in his gust, called them the nihilo-libertarians, and identified them as the modal, typical and representative libertarians. They fantasized of a society where everyone would be free to choose and cultivate whatever non-aggressive lifestyle, career, or character he wanted, and where, as a result of free market economics, everyone could do so on an elevated level of general prosperity. Ironically, the movement that had set out to dismantle the state and restore private property and market economics, was largely appropriated and its appearance shaped by the mental and emotional products of the welfare state, the new class of permanent adolescents. This intellectual combination could hardly end happily. Private property capitalism and egalitarian multiculturalism are as unlikely a combination as socialism and cultural conservatism. And in trying to combine what cannot be combined, much of the modern libertarian movement actually contributed to the further erosion of private property rights, just as much of contemporary conservatism contributed to the erosion of families and traditional morals. What the countercultural libertarians fail to recognize, and what true libertarians cannot emphasize enough, is that the restoration of private property rights and laissez-faire economics implies a sharp and drastic increase in social discrimination, and will swiftly eliminate most, if not all, of the multicultural egalitarian lifestyle experiments so close to the heart of left libertarians. In other words, libertarians must be radical and uncompromising conservatives. Contrary to the left libertarians assembled around such institutions as the Cato Institute and the Institute for Justice, for instance, who seek the assistance of the central government in the enforcement of various policies of non-discrimination and call for a non-discriminatory or free immigration policy, true libertarians must embrace discrimination, be it internal, domestic, or external, foreign. Indeed, private property means discrimination. I, not you, own such and such. I am entitled to exclude you from my property. I may attach conditions to your using my property, and I may expel you from my property. Moreover, you and I, private property owners, may enter and put our property into a restrictive or protective covenant. We and others may, if we both deem it beneficial, impose limitations on the future use that each of us is permitted to make with our property. The modern welfare state has largely stripped private property owners of the right to exclusion implied in the concept of private property. To exclude other people from one's own property is the very means by which an owner can avoid quote-unquote bads from happening, events that will lower the value of one's property. In not being permitted to freely exclude, the incidence of bads, ill-behaved, lazy, unreliable, rotten students, employees, customers will increase and property values will fall. In fact, forced integration, the result of all non-discrimination policies, breeds ill behavior and bad character. In civilized society, the ultimate price for ill behavior is expulsion, and all-round ill-behaved or rotten characters, even if they commit no criminal offence, will find themselves quickly expelled from everywhere and by everyone and become outcasts, physically removed from civilization. This is a stiff price to pay, hence the frequency of such behavior is reduced. The results of forced integration are only too visible. All social relations, whether in private or business life, have become increasingly egalitarian. Everyone is on a first-name basis with everyone else, and uncivilized. In distinct contrast, a society in which the right to exclusion is fully restored to owners of private property would be profoundly unegalitarian, intolerant, and discriminatory. There would be little or no quote-unquote tolerance and quote-unquote open-mindedness so dear to left libertarians. Instead, one would be on the right path toward restoring the freedom of association and exclusion implied in the institution of private property if only towns and villages could and would do what they did as a matter of course until well into the 19th century in Europe and the United States. There would be signs regarding entrance requirements to the town, and once in town, requirements for entering specific pieces of property, for example, no beggars, bums or homeless, but also no homosexuals, drug users, Jews, Muslims, Germans or Zulus, and those who did not meet these entrance requirements would be kicked out as trespassers. Almost instantly, cultural and moral normalcy would reassert itself. Left libertarians and multi- or countercultural lifestyle experimentalists, even if they were not engaged in any crime, would once again have to pay a price for their behavior. If they continued with their behavior or lifestyle, they would be barred from civilized society and live physically separate from it, in ghettos or on the fringes of society, and many positions or professions would be unattainable to them. In contrast, if they wished to live and advance within society, they would have to adjust and assimilate to the moral and cultural norms of the society they wanted to enter. To thus assimilate would not necessarily imply that one would have to give up one's substandard or abnormal behavior or lifestyle altogether. It would imply, however, that one could no longer quote-unquote come out and exhibit one's alternative behavior or lifestyle in public. Such behavior would have to stay in the closet, hidden from the public eye and physically restricted to the total privacy of one's own four walls. Advertising or displaying it in public would lead to expulsion. Moreover, true conservative libertarians, in contrast to left libertarians, must not only recognize and emphasize the fact that there will be a sharp increase in discrimination, exclusion, expulsion in a libertarian society wherein private property rights are fully restored to the owners of private households and estates. More importantly, they will have to recognize, and conservatives and conservative insights can be helpful in achieving this, that this ought to be so. That is, that there should be strict discrimination if one wants to reach the goal of a private property anarchy or a pure private law society. Without continued and relentless discrimination, a libertarian society would quickly erode and degenerate into welfare state socialism. Every social order, including a libertarian or conservative one, requires a self-enforcement mechanism. More precisely, social orders, unlike mechanical or biological systems, are not maintained automatically. They require conscious effort and purposeful action on the part of the members of society to prevent them from disintegrating.